The last Democrat to fall below 60% with Latino voters was John Kerry, who lost the presidential race in 2004. These gains by Republicans can swing outcomes in battleground states, including in Nevada, which has one of the biggest Latino communities in the nation. Harris is also struggling with Hispanic men, like undecided voter Robert Hernandez. The restaurant manager is not troubled by Trump's tough immigration stance, despite his own parents being immigrants.
I certainly understand. I know where my parents came from. I get it. But I also understand the security of the actual border, so I try to look at it from a broad perspective as to what's really right.
It's clear that any path to victory for Harris and Trump will require tapping into this powerful voting bloc, who make up about 1 in every 5 registered voters in this state. In the state's largest city, Las Vegas, thousands of Latinos work in the gambling hub's numerous hotels and casinos. Many are part of the powerful Culinary Workers Union, which is spending millions of dollars on a get-out-to-vote drive for Harris. Hotel worker and union member Arturo Maya, like many Hispanics, is offended by Trump's rhetoric.
I am insulted by him, because we have come from Latin America and have come here to contribute, not to beg or take. We come here to work.
Still, there's a lot of anger at Democrats for the state's economic condition. Nevada has the highest unemployment rate out of any state in the country. In the predominantly Hispanic suburb of North Las Vegas, both housing prices and poverty levels have soared. At a Latino Americans for Trump meeting, homemaker Ashley Flores said that it was Trump's economic message that most appealed to her and other Latinos.
Trump is someone who is a man of values, a man of faith, someone who keeps his word. He might be a jerk. People don't like him. I don't care. He resolves. So how do I identify with him? With finances, with the economy.
As Election Day approaches, most polls show Trump and Harris running neck and neck in Nevada. That is going to put a lot of pressure on the political parties in this swing state to mobilize their voters and have a high turnout, especially among the state's Hispanic voters. Martin Markovitz, TRT World, Las Vegas, Nevada.
Let's go now to another battleground state, Arizona, which is a state that Biden won in 2020. That was actually the first time a Democrat won there since Bill Clinton did back in 1996. Craig Boswell is in Phoenix, Arizona. And how are Harris's chances looking, Craig, when you consider the importance that immigration plays for every voter, I imagine, in Arizona?
Oh, most definitely. And there's so many ways to slice Arizona's electorate and the importance to each one of these two candidates for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Both have been reaching out to the Latino vote here in Arizona. But big picture here, we can talk about which one that is going to benefit. It's immigration, of course, and border security. And voters kind of almost pull those two things apart, even though they're together. Border security, voters tend to lead more towards Donald Trump. Immigration and immigration reform, which voters in Arizona want, they tend to lean towards more Kamala Harris. Another way to look at this, and this is the reason why we're in this particular polling location in Maricopa County, in downtown Phoenix. Maricopa County is a must-win county in Arizona. 60% of the voters live here. 4.5 million people across Arizona have already voted. 1.5 million have already voted in Maricopa County. The reason we chose this location is because of the youth vote that these candidates are trying to go after, particularly the youth Latino vote. To my right is Arizona State University's downtown campus, and to my left is more of the professional downtown workers. So the youth vote, Joe Biden won by 60% in 2020. No Democratic president has ever won without 60% of the youth vote. Democrats, to get to your question, see some problems with Kamala Harris and the youth vote, and in particular the youth Latino vote. Donald Trump has made inroads with that vote over the last few months, and now about 40% of the newly kind of eligible voters in the western United States, including Arizona, are young Latino voters. That is going to be a huge block of voters for one of these candidates. And if you recall, here in Arizona, it was 10,457 votes is what Joe Biden won in 2020, turning the state blue, as you correctly pointed out. It could likely be that margin of victory again for one of these candidates. Now, in terms of hours, we should start getting some of these first totals of voting. I'm told by the Secretary of State in about 6 hours we're going to get the first kind of tranche of votes. It's going to be that early voting where there was more than 1 million early votes. We're going to get about 70 to 75% of that. Then we're going to start to see where the trend lines are going. People tell me here that particularly the youth vote, they're anxious, but at the same time, they're joyous. That's the kind of dichotomy we have going in Arizona, and that's what makes it so interesting to watch. And of course, they all know the importance of Arizona, and that Arizona could be the 11 electoral votes if it one of these candidates into the White House.
And very much a toss-up state at this stage, Craig. Interestingly, some of the latest polls are showing that Trump could be leading at least marginally in the state. You mentioned the importance of the youth vote. In addition to the crucial issues of border security and immigration, what are most young voters focusing on this election?
And that's interesting because it kind of goes into a gender gap there. It goes into women's reproductive rights for women, and then it goes into immigration, border security, economy for men. And on that, there's a couple of ballot measures. Arizona's voting, it's a huge ballot. It's 2 pages back and forth. There are ballot measures that are also going to drive people to one of these candidates. There's an abortion rights ballot measure that is shrining that in the Constitution. That's driving your women voters. There's an immigration border security ballot measure that's driving the younger men voters. That makes it a state crime for someone to cross the border illegally. Those types of things are slowing the voting process down because it's a long ballot, but it's also segregating kind of the population into the kind of these topics that they think are most important to them and most important to the country going forward.
Thanks very much for this update. Craig Boswell from Phoenix, Arizona. And as we've been mentioning, one of the key issues for voters across the United States is the economy. A majority of voters saying they feel very strongly about the need for the candidates, whoever is elected next, focus on the state of the U.S. economy. Now, U.S. elections always come with a hefty price tag. In the 2024 election cycle, more than $10 billion has been spent on political ads. That is up $1 billion from 4 years ago. Nearly $1 billion has been spent on ads over the last week alone, with Democrats outspending Republicans as both campaigns try to safeguard the integrity of the voting system. Randolph Nogel reports from Colorado.
The gears of democracy are in motion at this election center in Golden, Colorado. The first day of sorting early ballots here. It's a process of precision election workers are putting on public display to dismantle disinformation by the Trump campaign that has only accelerated since the 2020 election.
We had all seen January 6th happen on our screens, and we also had national news stations, spewing disinformation about our elections. And so sometimes people would hear information on a news channel or through social media and say, oh, that sounds scary. Like, I don't know if I trust elections here. And we were getting some of these calls, or we were getting some of these emails, and decided, you know what, let's bring more people in. Because when you see the process, you see how well it works.
Amanda Gonzalez says Republicans and Democrats working here are paired together to ensure every vote cast is counted accurately. But a component of election integrity that's more complex to unpack is the money behind disinformation and manipulation of U.S. elections. At the University of Colorado, that's one of the topics being discussed at a series of weekly forums ahead of the November 5th national vote.
But we also see Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, just buying a platform, losing billions of dollars because he wants to influence elections.
So I think there are conversations happening, right? There's a acknowledgement that the current system of elections does not work well. In the U.S., even elections for the federal government, many of the rules are made by state governments, right? And different states are in the control of different political parties. And often, those parties try to shift the rules in their own state to benefit the national candidates.
We bear a great responsibility.
Yemi Mobolade paved his own path between America's two main political parties as an independent. A Nigerian-born pastor, he was elected mayor of Colorado Springs last year.
America's ready for a new way we're tired of the smearing and the fear tactic and the name calling and the lies.
But the vast amount of money in American politics remains a barrier for many independent candidates at all levels in America.
I'm an independent. After going through this process, I now understand why even in a nonpartisan election like Colorado Springs, people still look to the parties for help. Because you have the infrastructure.
This election has already seen a record-setting $15.9 billion spent. And while polling suggests nearly 2/3 of Americans, regardless of political party, consider the influence of money in politics as a top priority, it really isn't being talked much about by either of the major party candidates. America's vast political landscape is for now confined, with a new dawn of real election integrity deferred. Randolph Nogel, TRT World, in the U.S. state of Colorado.
We did promise our viewers it would be crisscrossing between the United States and the various outposts. Well, not that far away, but China, I suppose, is a long distance, isn't it? We're going to go there now. Not since Mao Zedong died almost 50 years ago is China believed to have had such a powerful leader as Xi Jinping.
And there is little doubt, David, that the next US president will be dealing with a country that he or she believes is one of the key threats to the United States, both economically and militarily. Roland de Bruyne has the story.
At Beijing's upmarket Sanlitun district, American brands take center stage. Despite ongoing tension between the world's two biggest superpowers, demand for American food, fashion, and iPhones hasn't gone away. Nevertheless, there's increasing resentment over American politics. In the race to the White House, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have used rhetoric regarded by people here as China bashing.
I've been very concerned about this trend for a while, and I find it has a big impact on me and causes me some anxiety.
No matter who wins the election, I believe our country is very strong now, and no matter what measures they impose, we will respond with strong countermeasures.
Experts say regardless of who wins the presidential election, ties between the world's two biggest powers are likely to remain strained. President Joe Biden has kept high tariffs on Chinese imports in an extension of Donald Trump's trade policy on China. Kamala Harris is expected to maintain a similar policy.
Trump, meanwhile, has pledged to drastically increase tariffs on foreign goods entering the U.S., including imposing tariffs of 60% or higher on Chinese goods.
That would represent a significant escalation of the trade war he launched during his first term as president, which sent relations spiraling between the two sides.
I hope he will not go to that length. He will need to really take into consideration the fundamental interests of the American people and deal with China as what China is and solve all these trade issues and other issues in peace with mutual respect, rather than trying to manhandle China as if there will be no consequences.
Trade aside, differences over Taiwan and efforts, as China sees it, to contain the advancement of its technology remain major sticking points. Despite improved communication between the two sides, experts say policymakers have abandoned hopes for collaboration. Recent high-level meetings have yielded limited results. Instead, the focus has turned towards defining the condition of competition with one another to prevent any greater fallout between the rival superpowers. Roland de Bruyne, TRT World, Beijing.
Let's go to Hong Kong. My colleague Oscar Surbakti is there. If tariffs are one form of economic warfare, then let's move on to the threat of military conflict, which also ties up with the economy when it comes to Taiwan. Oscar, and is this something that China's worried about, who's going to be in the Oval Office when it comes to Taiwan?
Well, yes, David, China and the rest of the region, quite frankly. As you know, Taiwan is closely aligned with the United States. The United States effectively promising Taiwan its autonomy at the very least, or independence at the most. And China will be closely watching the outcome of this election to see just how hawkish the next president will be when it comes to Taiwan. There's a lot of questions about whether or not Beijing will in fact one day annex the territory in the near future. Of course, that question was raised after Russia invaded Ukraine, and many had speculated that Beijing would also consider a similar move. But as we saw under the current Biden administration, we had the likes of the Democratic lawmaker Nancy Pelosi make a high-profile visit to Taipei, really showing the US support for its autonomy and independence. But in terms of what Donald Trump or Kamala Harris will do is anyone's guess at this point. But it is something that Beijing is very concerned about, no doubt.
Can I jump back a little bit, Oscar? I know in that package there was a great deal about China's economy and tariffs, but it's worth hearing from you on how strong China's economy is at the moment, because I've been reading that, in fact, it grew for years, and in fact, now it's suddenly falling back a little bit. Could it withstand strong tariffs?
Well, yes. I mean, the China economic story has been one that's unfolded over the last 2 decades or so. It's largely seen as an economic tiger in the region and across the world. And of course, it is currently the number 2 economy behind the United States. But in recent years, we've seen a slump, not only due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the harsh lockdown measures that really did cripple the economy, but since it reopened, we've seen certain sectors struggle, especially China's once lucrative and booming property sector. Now, that's largely weighed down economic growth at this point. There is a question as to whether or not China will reach its 5% GDP growth target for the year. So there are a lot of concerns about economic growth here, and Beijing is mulling massive stimulus measures that will potentially impact trade with the United States. So when it comes to the question of even more tariffs from an incoming US administration, surely that is something of concern for the lawmakers in Beijing.
Thank you very much indeed. Live from Hong Kong. Well, the momentum is continuing to build as we inch closer to the end of voting. What are the exit polls telling us about the chances of each candidate? Let's check in with both the Trump and Harris campaign. We've got John Brain in Florida at the Trump camp, and we've got Selena Downs in Washington, D.C. and Howard University, which is being used as the Harris campaign headquarters. First to you, Selena. It's possibly going to be a very long night, but certainly also quite a big night for Kamala Harris. How are her supporters feeling about her chances this evening?
I would say they are optimistic. I think they think she can do it. Her campaign thinks she can do it. She thinks she can do it. If you've been listening to her campaign rallies over the past few months and certainly overnight, she is energized. She thinks she's done enough to get across the line here. Remember, she's only come into this election 3 months ago. If I'd said to you 3 months ago that the president would stand aside to make way for his younger vice president, she would enter the race. There would be 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Kamala Harris would galvanize Democrat support across the country. You probably would have thought I was crazy, but here we are. So she thinks she's done enough, but she's been furiously campaigning across the city, across the country for the past few days. She spent today phoning into local radio stations in those key swing states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. She's been trying to reach as many voters in the 11th hour as she can because she knows that those swing states will be critical to her winning the White House. She visited a phone bank in the nation's capital today where she got on the phone to one voter. They've been ringing voters all day, trying to tell them to get out and vote. Kamala Harris actually got on the phone to one voter and asked the woman, "Have you voted?" When the woman said yes, she had, she thanked her. She knows that it'll be the voters in those key swing states, especially the blue wall, which she really needs to win. Her clearest path to the White House is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. She will be hoping to take those states tonight if she's to secure the presidency.
Although we all know that the results may not be called tonight, not called on Tuesday at least. This is how tight this race is. It could actually take several days, just like it did 4 years ago. What are the different scenarios that the Harris campaign is looking at? I know she said that she would have all the lawyers ready if there was going to be any sort of litigation following a close race, if it boils down to that.
Yeah, and there's definitely been a lot of concern in the capital in Washington, D.C. We saw lots of businesses boarding up in the past few days because they are worried about violence, possible violence, if Donald Trump contests the results of this election, as his supporters did back on January the 6th in 2021 when they stormed the Capitol building as Congress was certifying those results. But I think certainly here, Kamala Harris is hoping for a win. It's here at Howard University, her old university, a historic homecoming for her. It's where she did her undergraduate degree before becoming a prosecutor, a senator, a vice president, and now, of course, standing on the precipice of becoming America's first female president. She's been talking a lot about freedom, hope, positivity, really trying to paint that contrast between her optimism and Donald Trump's much darker dystopian themes at his campaign rally. She's been trying to paint herself as the career prosecutor, him the felon, and she's really hoping that that's resonated with voters. She's enjoying a lot of women, support from women voters. We've seen a lot of younger women galvanized by her, not just because she's a woman, but because she is supporting reproductive freedoms. She's pledging to restore abortion access right across the country here in the United States, rights that were severely restricted under Donald Trump's presidency. And that has resonated with a lot of voters, not just younger voters, but also older women too. And her campaign are hoping that it will be those older women that will be prompted to go out and vote at the ballot box. She's also been reaching out to Republicans, not just Democrats. We've seen her campaigning with the likes of Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, who was vice president under George W. Bush, a Republican. And also she's trying to reach those Nikki Haley supporters who are also Republicans. You might remember Nikki Haley was the Republican candidate that really fought Donald Trump right to the end for the Republican candidacy. They're telling Republican women, you don't need to tell people who you're going to vote for. You can just do it. Vote for Kamala Harris, and hopefully she's hoping that getting across the sort of political spectrum might see her over the line.
Thanks. Selena Harris will no doubt also be hoping to hold on to as many voters as she possibly can from within the African-American community, symbolically choosing Howard University, as you mentioned earlier, the historically black college in Washington, D.C., which she says played a major role in shaping the person she is, the African-American vote becoming increasingly important in U.S. elections, making up some 14% of eligible voters. Let's go now to the Sunshine State, Florida, where John Brain is standing by at the Trump campaign. John, needless to say, the election's so close, so uncertain. I won't ask you to predict the results, but just how confident are the people around you in the Trump camp?
Oh, it's absolutely on a knife edge, but the Trump camp says it's cautiously optimistic. They're very happy with their early voting numbers and the fact that they've got more Republicans registered this time round than in 2020 and in 2016, of course. And they believe that they are on course for victory. And it's very interesting here, the contrast between Harris in Washington, as we've been hearing Selena describe, not just the difference in the messages, the darkness of Trump and the positivity of Harris, but the fact that Trump has been around for so long. He's dominated this country's politics for nearly a decade now. Harris is this new candidate. But Trump supporters still seem to be as energized as ever. And you go around America, if you're not in those liberal heartlands like New York or Washington or Los Angeles, you come out to other parts of America, people are still very enthusiastic about Donald Trump. Some people have described it almost like a religious cult. And we've been speaking to people here in Florida, and we say, but look, women in particular, we say, look, his character defects, how can you overlook that? And they'll say things to us like, well, I'm not going out to dinner with him, but I want him as my president because he'll be better on the economy, he'll be better on immigration, and they believe that he also is a better representative of the United States abroad. They believe he keeps America strong. So it's a very different dynamic between the two candidates and also their supporters. But clearly, they can't both be right when they say they're going to win. So we're going to have to wait and see how things unfold over the next few hours and possibly next few days. Donald Trump already preparing the groundwork for a reaction if he is defeated. He says he'll accept defeat if the election is fair. Many Republicans are gearing up for potential legal challenges if he does lose, though, and we can expect many comments that the election isn't necessarily fair. One more bit of news to tell you. J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, has just arrived with a huge police convoy inside the headquarters here now. We're expecting Trump a little later on this evening.
John, just give us a brief sense of the importance of the state of Florida. In the overall electoral map, we know that President Trump, former President Trump, won the state both in 2016 and 2020, but there have been recent shifting dynamics, certainly within the Puerto Rican and Latino community. Is it enough to take voters away from Trump, or is it looking like at least Florida may be a foregone conclusion?
No, I think Florida will remain solidly Republican. Of course, I may be wrong. That is speculation on my part. I mean, it used to be a swing state, but the demographics have changed and it's become pretty solidly Republican now. So it's unlikely that Florida will be contested. Trump assumes that one is in the bag. But of course, this has been an unpredictable election. And for example, Iowa, where another solidly Republican state you'd have thought, a recent poll by a respected pollster had Harris in the lead by 3 points in Iowa, which has got nerves jangling slightly here among the Trump team, because that would signal that that whole Midwest region might be very vulnerable for them. So although we've been saying all along, all the 43 of these states, it's pretty cut and dried, and it's just 7 swing states to compete for, who knows, there might be a surprise somewhere tonight.
All right, for now, thanks very much, John Brain in Florida. David.
Interesting that John was talking about voters not necessarily wanting to go out and have dinner with Donald Trump. Perhaps he's stronger on the economy than he is on table manners. Is it about personality or is it about policies? Actually, who the candidates seem to be rather than what they believe in. And in another swing state where we go now, Wisconsin, it does seem very much to be about character.
Welcome to Wisconsin. It's peaceful yet polarized. A state that became politically divided faster than the rest of the nation, and where most voters care more about feelings than issues. And for Donald Trump supporters, that feeling exploded on July 13th when he survived an assassination attempt.
I felt that renewed energy around him, but the vibe is that people are getting behind Trump and want to support him, and they're proud to do it.
A week later, the Democrats saw their feelings explode when President Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris stepped in. And they really noticed it at this weekly corner gathering of Democrats.
This corner changed completely. That corner, this place was on fire that Tuesday. So you ask about, has there been a change? I can tell you, it was dramatic.
So enthusiastic are Democrats now for Harris here at the party headquarters that the most obvious vulnerability for Trump, the fact that he's a convicted felon, is barely mentioned. Years ago, pollsters say you could get 20% of Wisconsin voters to switch political sides based on actual issues. Nowadays, maybe 5% will switch sides. So the goal at both Republican and Democratic Party headquarters is to just get their own supporters enthusiastic enough to get out and vote. For Trump fans, it's the belief that his assassination attempts prove he's important.
The enthusiasm has been amazing. Every day we're busy. We're getting a lot of donations.
A few weeks ago,
Hillary Clinton never campaigned at all in Wisconsin during the 2016 race and lost the state to Trump. So for Harris fans, it's the fact that she is showing up.
I've been to 2 of her rallies so far. You can sense a new enthusiasm.
Still, for better or worse, pollsters say Trump alone dominates the Wisconsin race now, with the state's voters either loving him or hating him, and both emotions incredibly intense.
They say that Wisconsin is...
Polls show Trump is underwater in Wisconsin. That's more unpopular than popular by about 11 percentage points. Harris is underwater, too, by about 3 points. So will simply being less unpopular be enough to win Wisconsin? Andy Roaston, TRT World.
Well, so much is down to character and personality, but it's also about policies and how the candidates differ. Craig Boswell is in Arizona with a look at immigration and other key domestic issues that matter to voters in this election.
It's the hottest city in the United States, and Phoenix, Arizona is central in the heated battle for the White House.
Thank you, Arizona. God bless you.
The key issue here is border security. Harris recently called for extending restrictions to help reduce unlawful crossings and investments in detection technology. Trump's border policies are his signature issues, mostly focused on deportations and deterrence, including his border wall from his first term. Republicans blame Harris and President Biden for a rise in border crossings, especially in Arizona.
It's one of the most remote sections of the U.S.-Mexico border, and also one of the busiest for U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. Those who live anywhere near the miles and miles of border won't tell you who they're voting for, but they're quick to say they're skeptical either presidential candidate will find a workable solution to border security.
It's very important here. I think it's very important to go out and vote for whomever they choose to vote for. I'm not saying who I'm voting for.
The economy is one of the other top issues across the U.S. Harris wants a first-ever national price gouging ban on food and groceries. Trump vows to lower costs by boosting oil and gas production. Harris plans to boost housing development, aid first-time homebuyers, and expand tax credits. Trump plans to extend and expand tax cuts he signed into law in 2017 and cut the corporate tax rate. On reproductive rights, Harris wants abortion access in federal law.
He brags about overturning Roe v. Wade.
Trump says it should be left for the states to decide. But the biggest decision in the 2024 race really lies with a small group of independent voters.
I will never be a party hack for the Republican, nor will I be a Democrat.
Other issues driving people to the polls include health care and climate change. Craig Boswell, TRT World, Arizona.
Let's go across now to Europe and see what a Trump victory could mean for the United States' European allies. We're joined by David Dunn, who is a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham. Professor Dunn, we heard on the campaign trail more than once Donald Trump warn, perhaps even threaten, some European countries with the idea that he may, if he becomes president, slap tariffs on 10 to 20% of imports from Europe. Just how nervous would a lot of European allies be?
I think the Europeans are very concerned about a whole range of topics. Tariffs is certainly high on that list. We saw limited tariffs imposed on European imports into America last time round, and we had a trade war whereby the EU responded by putting tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorbikes and bourbon whiskey and a variety of other imported goods into Europe. That was a limited and damaging exchange of a nascent trade war. However, if there are to be 20% universal tariffs across the board, that will be very damaging to European trade, but also very damaging to transatlantic relations more broadly, because the Europeans and Americans have traditionally seen themselves as sharing values and interests, and as part of that has been free trade and integrated economies. And if the Trump administration treats everybody the same as potential rivals and is only interested in the trade surplus between the countries, then that creates a very different climate between Europe and America. So there are grave concerns about the impact of a tariff regime. But that's not the only thing. The Europeans have been at the forefront of being concerned about global warming and pushing forward an international agreement through the Paris process, whereby the people agreed to actually cut down their impact on production of carbon in terms of greenhouse gases and the climate crisis. And what Trump plans to do is very worrying to the Europeans for three reasons. First of all, he plans to repeal a lot of the environmental protection measures that the Biden administration put in. Secondly, He plans to drill as much oil and gas as he possibly can out of the Permian Basin through the process of fracking of shale gas and oil. And thirdly, he plans to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Those three things together would make it difficult to sustain a long-term effort internationally to address climate change. And therefore, the Europeans are really concerned about the way in which Trump's economic and energy policies affect climate change and the international effort to address that crisis.
On the other hand, if Kamala Harris wins, we've heard that she may be a little cautious on free trade, but in her case, there would not be any slide into protectionism, the way we very well might see under Trump, and he's made that quite clear, as you've just pointed out. But there's also the future of the transatlantic alliance, not just the economic relations with European countries, but the United States relations with NATO members. Trump, on more than one occasion, making disparaging comments about NATO, calling it obsolete. How will NATO allies be looking at this election result?
Yeah, and the biggest area of concern with regard to the wider European security question is what Trump plans to do with Ukraine. And it looks like he, in his talk of bringing the war to an end within one day with a few phone calls, would be to force the Ukrainians to accept peace on Moscow's terms under threat that America will withdraw all military and financial aid to Ukraine. And what that does is undermine confidence and trust in the American security guarantee to Europe. If the Americans are prepared to do that to Ukraine, if the Americans are prepared to actually view their European allies only in transactional economic terms, then really can the Europeans trust the American security guarantee to Europe? And of course, there was a comment out of the last Trump administration of him threatening to leave the NATO alliance. And of course, he's also said that actually, if people don't contribute enough financially to NATO, then he would quote, invite Putin to do whatever the hell he likes, unquote, to European states. And that undermines the confidence that the Americans will be there to actually be the security backstop for Europe. And even if Trump weren't to actually withdraw from NATO, the fact that he's much less obviously a supporter of European security gives great concern to many Europeans. So Trump and Harris are seen as a fork in the road. Harris is seen as continuity for NATO and continuity in trade, whereas a Trump victory would see a major diversion away from the traditional relationship that's existed across the Atlantic in interests, in trade, and primarily in security policy. Right. So this really is an important juncture.
It is. Professor David Dunn, thanks very much indeed. David.
Gina, great to hear from you, and from David Dunn, thank you very much indeed. Where we've been tonight, we've been to Wisconsin, we've been to Michigan, we've been to Pennsylvania, we've been to Florida, we've been all over the country, but one place that we haven't mentioned, and it's no surprise because it is so Trumpian, is West Virginia. Well, I went there very recently. It is beautiful, but it is so bleak in more ways than one. Poverty, drug addiction, and a dying coal industry. Beyond Borders is the programme, and while I was there, I met three people. A coal miner, almost 40 years in the business, a man deeply involved in fracking, that's going for natural gas underground, and one of the most respected journalists in the state. Here's a taste of what they had to say.
Is any kind of leadership at the very top in this country going to change things as drastically as you think maybe they need to be changed?
I don't think, well, Trump might change it. He might do some things different. He'll loosen up government control. The problem with any kind of energy is government control. They want to control how much you can make, how you make it, what you do with it, how you use it. And the more that happens, the less freedom people do or have to invent or to create. It takes away the power of the people when I think of the mind, because you got somebody else thinking for you.
One of the things I've read about is that if it's no longer coal, if it's no longer industry, West Virginia is wanting to become a tourist destination.
You know, there's a lot of states that have beautiful scenery, but the people here I think is what makes West Virginia greater than anything. We're friendly. We want to help. You know, if anybody needs anything, we're willing to give. And the people is what makes the state or the nation. It's not the leaders. It's more the people. That's why I say you got to have a government that is for the people and by the people, not just government control and everything.
We supply the rest of the country with natural resources. We supply them with coal. We supply them with natural gas, oil, timber. So it's a lot of people's belief that our school systems are keeping our young children where they belong.